Hey everyone, welcome back to another journey into the distant past. Tonight we're stepping away from the complexities of modern life and diving deep into something beautifully simple yet profoundly challenging. We're exploring how our earliest ancestors survived in a world without grocery stores, without farming, without any of the conveniences we take for granted today. So grab a warm drink, get comfortable, and let's drift back roughly 40,000 years to discover how cavemen hunted for food and gathered sustenance in ways that would humble even the most skilled outdoorsman today. Before you settle in completely, take a moment to like this video if you're enjoying the content, and subscribe only if these deep dives into history genuinely help you unwind. I'm always curious to know where you're tuning in from around the world and what time it is for you right now. There's something fascinating about connecting across time zones through these ancient stories. Now dim those lights, maybe turn on a fan for that gentle white noise, and let's ease into tonight's exploration together. Picture this. You wake up as the first pale light creeps across a landscape that looks nothing like the world we know today. There are no roads cutting through the wilderness, no distant hum of traffic, no electric lights piercing the darkness. Just you, your small group of maybe 20 or 30 people, and an endless expanse of untamed wilderness stretching in every direction. Your stomach growls with genuine hunger, not the casual appetites we experience before our next meal, but the deep, gnawing emptiness that comes from not eating for perhaps a day or more. This is your reality as a Paleolithic hunter-gatherer, and your day begins with one singular, urgent purpose. Finding food, not planning what to cook for dinner, not deciding between restaurants, or checking what's left in the refrigerator. Your survival depends entirely on your ability to locate, capture, or gather enough calories to keep yourself and your group alive for another day. It's a challenge that consumed virtually every waking hour of these early humans, and yet they not only survived but thrived for tens of thousands of years, using nothing but their intelligence, cooperation, and an intimate understanding of the natural world around them. The morning ritual begins before dawn with the quiet stirring of your group. There's no alarm clock, no snooze button, just the gradual lightening of the sky and the internal rhythms that have guided human sleep patterns for millennia. As consciousness returns, the first thoughts aren't about checking messages or planning the day's schedule. They're about reading the environment. What does the wind direction tell you about animal movements? Are there fresh tracks near the water source? Did the weather patterns overnight change the likelihood of finding certain plants or drive game animals to different areas? Your hunting party consists of perhaps 6 to 8 individuals, each with specialized knowledge passed down through generations of trial, error, and careful observation. There's the tracker whose eyes can spot disturbances in soil and vegetation that would be completely invisible to modern humans. The weapons specialist who can craft and maintain spears, arrows, and traps with precision that rivals any manufactured tool. The strategist who understands animal behavior patterns and can predict where prey might be found at different times of day and in various weather conditions. Here's what makes their approach so remarkable. Unlike our modern world, where we often work alone or in competition with others, these early hunting groups operated with a level of cooperation and shared purpose that was essential for survival. Every successful hunt meant food for the entire group. Every failure meant everyone went hungry. This created social bonds and collaborative strategies that were far more sophisticated than the popular image of club-wielding cavemen might suggest. The weapons they carried were marvels of prehistoric engineering, crafted entirely from materials found in nature, but designed with an understanding of physics and biomechanics that took thousands of years to develop. Their primary hunting tool was the spear, not a simple sharpened stick, but a carefully balanced weapon with a stone or bone point that had been knapped with incredible precision. The process of creating just one spear point could take hours of careful work, chipping away tiny flakes of flint or obsidian until the edge was sharp enough to slice through hide and penetrate vital organs. The spear thrower or atlatl, represented a technological breakthrough that increased the power and accuracy of thrown spears dramatically. This simple but ingenious device used leverage to essentially extend the length of the human arm, allowing hunters to launch projectiles with much greater force and at longer distances than would be possible with arm strength alone. Archaeological evidence suggests that skilled users could accurately hit targets at distances of over 100 feet and generate enough force to penetrate the thick hide of large game animals. For smaller game and birds, they developed an entirely different set of tools and techniques. Slings made from woven plant fibers could launch stones with devastating accuracy. Throwing sticks, the ancestors of boomerangs, were designed to fly in arcing patterns that could bring down birds in flight. Nets woven from plant materials or animal sinew could be used to trap entire flocks of birds or schools of fish in coordinated group efforts that required precise timing and positioning. But perhaps most impressive were their traps and snares, devices that could work continuously even while the hunters were engaged in other activities. These weren't simple nooses or pit traps, but sophisticated mechanical devices that used the prey animal's own movement and weight to trigger capture mechanisms. Deadfall traps used carefully balanced rocks or logs that would crush small game when triggered. Spring snares used the tension of bent branches to quickly tighten around an animal's neck or leg. Fish weirs were elaborate constructions that channeled migrating fish into narrow areas where they could be easily speared or netted. The knowledge required to construct and deploy these devices effectively was encyclopedic. Hunters needed to understand the feeding patterns, travel routes, and behavioral quirks of dozens of different species. They had to know which plants produced the strongest fibers for cordage, which stones would hold the sharpest edges, which woods had the right combination of flexibility and strength for different applications. This information wasn't written down anywhere. It existed only in the collective memory of the group and was transmitted through demonstration, practice, and storytelling around evening fires. Tracking was perhaps the most refined of all their skills, requiring an almost supernatural ability to read subtle signs in the environment. A bent blade of grass could indicate that an animal had passed by recently. The depth and spacing of footprints revealed not just what kind of animal had made them, but how fast it was moving, whether it was injured, and how long ago it had passed. Experienced trackers could follow trails that were hours or even days old, reconstructing the movements and behaviour of their quarry with remarkable accuracy. They understood that different animals left different types of sign beyond just footprints. Deer would leave scent marks by rubbing against trees and bushes. Wild boar would create distinctive wallows in muddy areas. Birds would leave feathers at roosting sites and distinctive droppings that could indicate both species and recent presence. Even the alarm calls of smaller animals could provide valuable information about the location and movement of larger prey species. The actual hunt itself required a combination of patience, stealth, and explosive action that demanded peak physical and mental conditioning. Hunters might spend hours moving silently through dense vegetation, communicating only through subtle hand signals, positioning themselves to take advantage of wind direction and natural cover. They had to be close enough to ensure an accurate spear throw or arrow shot, but not so close that their scent or movement would alert the prey and cause it to flee. Large game hunting was typically a group effort that involved driving animals toward waiting hunters or into natural traps like narrow ravines or water crossings where escape would be difficult. These coordinated hunts required extensive planning and precise execution. Some groups would act as drivers, making noise and waving branches to encourage animals to move in a specific direction. Others would wait in concealment along the anticipated escape route, ready to strike when the panicked animals came within range. The weapons used for large game were designed to cause massive trauma and blood loss, rather than instant death. A well-placed spear thrust would penetrate deep into the chest cavity, damaging vital organs and major blood vessels. The wounded animal might flee, but the hunters would follow patiently, tracking the blood trail until exhaustion and blood loss brought it down. This method required tremendous persistence and endurance, as the chase could continue for hours across difficult terrain. Smaller game required entirely different tactics and tools. Rabbits and other quick, agile prey were often taken with throwing sticks or slings that could deliver precise, stunning blows. Birds were captured using a variety of methods, including nets, snares, and even bare-handed techniques for those with exceptional reflexes and timing. Fish were speared, netted, or caught with ingenious trap systems that took advantage of seasonal migration patterns. But of hunting was only half the food acquisition equation. Gathering plant foods, insects, eggs, and other small sources of nutrition was equally important and often provided a more reliable source of calories than the unpredictable success of hunting expeditions. The plant knowledge of these early humans was staggering in its depth and complexity. They could identify hundreds of different species, knowing which parts were edible, when they were at peak nutritional value, how to process them to remove toxins or improve digestibility, and how to preserve them for later consumption. Nuts and seeds were particularly valuable because they provided concentrated calories and could be stored for extended periods. The process of harvesting, processing, and storing these foods required specialized tools and techniques. Heavy stones were used to crack open hard shells. Baskets woven from plant fibers allowed for efficient collection and transport. Underground storage pits lined with stones or bark could preserve nuts and dried foods for months. Root vegetables and tubers were another crucial food source, but finding and harvesting them required intimate knowledge of plant growth patterns and seasonal cycles. Digging sticks, often hardened in fire and sharpened to precise points, were used to excavate roots without damaging them. The best root gathering sites were closely guarded, secrets passed down through generations, and the sustainable harvesting of these areas required careful management to ensure they would continue producing food year after year. Berries, fruits, and leafy greens provided essential vitamins and minerals, but were highly seasonal and required perfect timing to harvest at peak ripeness. Gathering expeditions for these foods often involved travelling significant distances to reach productive areas, and the entire group might relocate temporarily to take advantage of abundant seasonal resources. The knowledge of when and where different plants would be available was as complex and detailed as any modern agricultural calendar. Processing plant foods often required sophisticated techniques to make them safe and digestible. Many wild plants contain natural toxins or are difficult to digest in their raw state. Acorns, for example, were a valuable source of carbohydrates and fats, but they contain high levels of bitter tannins that must be leached out through repeated soaking and rinsing before the nuts can be ground into flour. This process could take days of careful attention, but it converted an otherwise inedible resource into a staple food that could sustain the group through lean periods. The tools used for plant processing were as specialized and sophisticated as hunting weapons. Grinding stones were carefully shaped and maintained to process seeds and nuts into meal or flour. Sharp-edged stone knives were used to prepare plant materials and remove inedible portions. Containers made from bark, leaves, or animal skins allowed for the collection, transport, and storage of gathered foods. Seasonal timing was absolutely critical to successful gathering. These early humans developed an internal calendar that was far more precise than any modern weather app. They knew that certain berries would ripen exactly 14 days after the first spring flowers appeared on nearby trees. They understood that the best time to dig for certain roots was just before the autumn rains, when the plants had stored maximum energy reserves underground. This timing knowledge was the difference between abundance and starvation. Water sources played a central role in both hunting and gathering strategies. Animals needed to drink regularly, making rivers, springs, and watering holes natural locations for ambushes and trap placement. But water also supported the richest plant communities, providing everything from cattail roots that could be harvested from shallow marshes to the tender shoots of water plants that emerged each spring. Many groups planned their entire seasonal movements around the availability of water and the resources it supported. The social organization required for successful food procurement was remarkably sophisticated. Different individuals specialized in different aspects of the food quest based on their particular skills and physical capabilities. The most experienced trackers and hunters typically led hunting expeditions, but they relied heavily on the knowledge of plant specialists who could identify the best gathering processing techniques, locations, and younger members of the group served apprenticeships, gradually learning the complex skills required for independent food procurement. Food sharing within the group followed strict social protocols that ensured everyone's survival, even when individual efforts were unsuccessful. A hunter who returned empty-handed one day might be fed by others who had been more successful, with the understanding that roles would reverse when circumstances changed. This system of reciprocal support created powerful social bonds and reduced the risk that any individual would starve during temporary periods of bad luck or injury. The preparation and consumption of food involved ceremonies and rituals that reinforced group cohesion and expressed gratitude for successful procurement efforts. The first kill of a young hunter might be celebrated with special ceremonies that marked their transition to full adult status. Particularly, abundant harvests of seasonal foods were occasions for feasting and storytelling that strengthened cultural traditions and passed knowledge to younger generations. Preservation techniques allowed these groups to extend the value of successful hunting and gathering efforts far beyond the immediate consumption period. Meat was dried into jerky using combinations of sun, wind, and smoke that removed moisture and prevented spoilage. Fish were preserved using similar techniques or by packing them in salt when available. Plant foods were dried, fermented, or stored in ways that maintained their nutritional value for months. The smoking process for preserving meat was an art form that required careful control of temperature, humidity, and smoke composition. Different woods produced different flavors and preservation qualities. The racks and structures used for smoking were carefully constructed to ensure even air circulation and protection from rain and scavengers. A successful smoking operation could preserve hundreds of pounds of meat from a single large kill, providing protein reserves that might sustain the group through weeks of unsuccessful hunting. Underground storage systems were marvels of prehistoric engineering that took advantage of natural temperature and humidity conditions to preserve food without any artificial refrigeration. These storage pits were carefully lined with stones, bark, or animal hides to create sealed environments that protected stored foods from moisture, insects, and rodents. The locations of these storage sites were closely guarded secrets that represented months or even years of accumulated food security. The tools required for food processing and preservation were as important as hunting weapons and had to be maintained with equal care. Stone grinding implements were periodically resharpened by careful flaking to maintain their effectiveness. Wooden containers and utensils were treated with plant oils or animal fats to prevent cracking and extend their useful life. The loss or damage of essential food processing tools could be catastrophic for group survival. Fire management was central to almost every aspect of food procurement and processing. Cooking fires had to be carefully maintained to ensure consistent heat for roasting meat and processing plant foods. Smoking fires required different fuel and airflow management to produce the right conditions for preservation. Signal fires were used to coordinate hunting activities across large distances. The ability to create and maintain fire under various weather conditions was a skill that literally meant the difference between life and death. The cooking techniques developed by these early humans were surprisingly sophisticated, involving methods that maximized both nutritional value and flavor. Earth ovens were constructed by heating stones in a fire, then placing them in lined pits with food wrapped in leaves or animal skins. The residual heat from the hot stones would slowly cook the food over many hours, producing tender, flavorful results that were impossible to achieve with direct fire cooking. Boiling was accomplished even before the development of waterproof containers by using heated stones dropped into water-filled animal stomachs or tightly woven baskets lined with tree sap. This technique allowed for the preparation of stews and the extraction of nutrients from bones and tough plant materials that would otherwise be indigestible. The resulting broths provided essential minerals and vitamins that were crucial for maintaining health during periods of limited food variety. Different foods required specific preparation techniques to maximize their nutritional value and eliminate potential toxins. Certain seeds needed to be parched over fire to make them digestible. Some roots required extended cooking to break down tough fibers and convert starches into more readily available sugars. Bitter plants might need repeated boiling and rinsing to remove compounds that could cause illness. The knowledge of food combinations was equally important, as certain plants eaten together provided better nutrition than when consumed separately. Some combinations enhanced the absorption of specific vitamins or minerals. Seasonal food cycles determined not just what was eaten, but when groups moved from one location to another. Spring meant fresh greens and the return of migratory animals. Summer brought berries, nuts, and the peak growing season for many plant foods. Autumn was the time for major hunts and intensive gathering to build up reserves for winter. Winter survival depended on stored foods, supplemented by whatever could be hunted or gathered in harsh conditions. The physical demands of constant food procurement shaped every aspect of daily life. These early humans were extraordinarily fit by modern standards, capable of travelling dozens of miles on foot while carrying heavy loads of food and equipment. Their endurance allowed them to pursue wounded game across difficult terrain for hours without rest. Their strength enabled them to process large quantities of food using only manual labour and primitive tools. Mental acuity was equally important. A successful food procurement required constant problem-solving and adaptation to changing conditions. Weather patterns, animal behaviour, plant growth cycles, and seasonal variations all had to be factored into daily decisions about where to hunt, what to gather, and how to process and preserve food. The cognitive demands of this lifestyle produced individuals whose survival skills and environmental knowledge far exceeded anything seen in modern industrial societies. The intimate relationship these groups maintained with their natural environment created a sustainability that allowed the same hunting and gathering territories to support human populations for thousands of years without depleting resources. They understood carrying capacity and seasonal limitations in ways that prevented overexploitation of any particular food source. This long-term thinking ensured that future generations would inherit landscapes capable of supporting continued human habitation. Competition between different groups for prime hunting and gathering territories was managed through complex social relationships that balanced cooperation and conflict. Territorial boundaries were recognized and respected, but they were also flexible enough to allow for resource sharing during times of abundance and mutual support during periods of scarcity. Marriage relationships between groups created networks of alliance that facilitated trade and information exchange across vast distances. The transfer of food procurement knowledge from experienced adults to younger members of the group was a continuous process that began in early childhood and continued throughout life. Children learned by observation and participation, gradually taking on more responsible roles as their skills and judgment developed. This educational system ensured that critical survival knowledge was preserved and passed on even when individual group members were lost to accidents, illness, or old age. Innovation and experimentation were constant features of food procurement activities, as groups continuously refined their techniques and developed new approaches to improve their success rates. New tool designs were tested and adopted when they proved superior to existing methods. Novel processing techniques were shared between groups and spread across large geographic areas when they demonstrated clear advantages. This ongoing innovation ensured that food procurement methods continued to evolve and improve over time. The relationship between human groups and their food sources created complex migration patterns that followed natural cycles with remarkable precision. These weren't random wanderings or desperate searches for sustenance, but carefully planned movements that had been refined over generations to maximize access to seasonal resources while minimizing energy expenditure and territorial conflicts. Groups would follow established routes that connected winter shelters to spring hunting grounds, to summer gathering areas, to autumn processing sites, each location chosen for specific advantages it offered during particular times of year. Understanding weather patterns was as crucial as knowing animal behavior or plant growth cycles. These early humans could read cloud formations, wind directions, and atmospheric pressure changes with an accuracy that would impress modern meteorologists. They knew that certain weather conditions would drive game animals to seek shelter in predictable locations, creating hunting opportunities that might last only. They, a few hours, understood that temperature and humidity changes would affect plant growth rates and the timing of nut and berry harvests. The development of specialized hunting techniques for different types of prey required years of practice and refinement. Large herd animals like mammoths or bison demanded entirely different strategies than solitary predators or small quick prey. Mammoth hunting was perhaps the most complex and dangerous activity these groups undertook, requiring the coordination of dozens of individuals and the construction of elaborate trap systems that could channel these massive animals toward killing zones where their size actually worked against them. The logistics of a mammoth hunt were staggering in their complexity. Scouts would locate herds and track their movements for days or even weeks, learning their feeding patterns and preferred travel routes. Meanwhile, other group members would be constructing pit traps, sharpening spears, and preparing the tools needed for processing what could be thousands of pounds of meat, hide, and bone. The hunt itself might involve driving the animals toward cliffs, into bogs where their weight would trap them, or into specially constructed enclosures where they could be killed safely. Once a large animal was brought down, the work had only just begun. These groups had developed sophisticated butchering techniques that maximized the use of every part of the carcass. Nothing was wasted because waste meant the difference between survival and starvation. Meat was carefully separated according to its intended use, with some portions designated for immediate consumption, others for drying and preservation, and still others for rendering into fat that would provide concentrated calories and waterproofing materials. The hide removal process required specialized tools and techniques that preserved the integrity of what would become clothing, shelter materials, and containers. Scraping tools made from specially shaped stones removed flesh and fat from the inside of hides without damaging the skin itself. The brain tanning process that followed used enzymes from the animal's own brain tissue to create soft, flexible leather that could be sewn into garments or fashioned into water-resistant containers. Bone and antler processing represented another level of technological sophistication that transformed what modern people might consider waste into essential tools and weapons. Long bones were split lengthwise to access the nutrient-rich marrow inside, but the bone fragments were then carefully shaped into needles, awls, spear points, and other implements. Antlers were particularly valuable because their dense, hard structure could be carved into tools that would hold sharp edges and withstand repeated use. The rendering of animal fat was a critical process that provided not just food, but also materials for waterproofing, lamp fuel, and preservation compounds. Fat was carefully heated in containers made from the animal's own stomach lining, with temperature controlled to prevent burning, while ensuring complete liquefaction. The resulting tallow could be stored in specially prepared containers for months, providing a concentrated source of calories during lean periods when other foods were scarce. Fish and aquatic resources required completely different procurement strategies that took advantage of seasonal migrations and spawning behaviours. Groups living near rivers or lakes developed sophisticated understanding of fish behaviour patterns, knowing exactly when different species would be moving through particular areas and where they could be most easily captured. Fish weirs were elaborate constructions that could channel entire schools into narrow areas where they could be speared, netted, or trapped in large numbers. The construction of fish weirs required extensive cooperation and engineering knowledge that rivaled any modern construction project. These structures had to be built strong enough to withstand powerful currents and the force of thousands of migrating fish, yet flexible enough to allow some fish to pass through to ensure continued reproduction. The placement of these weirs was critical, as they had to be positioned at natural bottlenecks or migration routes where fish would naturally congregate. Net construction was an art form that required intimate knowledge of plant fibre properties and weaving techniques that produced nets strong enough to hold struggling fish, yet light enough to be deployed quickly by small teams of fishers. Different mesh sizes were used for different species, and the nets themselves were often treated with plant-based compounds that made them less visible and underwater. The coordination required to deploy these nets effectively involved precise timing and positioning that could only be achieved through extensive practice and communication. Shellfish gathering provided another reliable source of protein that was particularly important for coastal groups. The harvesting of oysters, clams, mussels, and other shellfish required detailed knowledge of tidal patterns and seasonal availability. These foods were often available when other resources were scarce, making them crucial backup sources of nutrition. The shells themselves became important materials for making tools, containers, and decorative items that served both practical and social functions. Insect gathering might seem primitive to modern sensibilities, but it provided an incredibly efficient source of protein and essential nutrients that required minimal energy expenditure to obtain. Certain insects were available in massive quantities during specific seasons, and groups developed techniques for harvesting them in large numbers. Grasshoppers and locusts could be collected during their swarming periods and dried for long-term storage. Ant larvae and termite reproductives were considered delicacies that provided concentrated nutrition in small packages. The processing of insects for consumption involved techniques that maximized their nutritional value while making them more palatable and digestible. Roasting over fires removed moisture and concentrated flavors while killing any parasites or harmful bacteria. Grinding dried insects into meal created a protein powder that could be mixed with plant foods to create nutritionally complete meals that provided all the amino acids necessary for human health. Egg gathering required careful timing and climbing skills that allowed access to bird nests in trees, on cliffs, and in other difficult locations. Different bird species nested at different times of year, and successful egg gatherers had to know the exact timing of laying cycles to harvest eggs when they were fresh but before the birds had invested too much energy in incubation. The techniques for preserving eggs involved methods that could keep them edible for weeks or even months. Tree climbing for eggs and honey required specialized techniques and equipment that allowed safe access to resources high above the ground. Climbing aids made from plant fibers and wooden implements helped gatherers reach nests and beehives that would otherwise be inaccessible. The honey gathering process was particularly dangerous because it involved dealing with aggressive bees, but the reward was one of the few sources of concentrated sugars available in the natural environment. The seasonal round of food activities created annual cycles that structured every aspect of group life. Spring awakening brought the return of migratory animals and the first fresh plant foods after months of preserved rations. This was a time of renewal and celebration, but also of careful rationing as stored foods from the previous year dwindled and new resources had not yet reached peak abundance. Early spring foods like tender shoots and eggs were especially prized because they provided fresh vitamins after long winter months of preserved foods. Summer represented the peak of abundance, when both animal and plant resources reached their maximum availability. This was the time for major hunting expeditions and intensive gathering activities that would build up the reserves needed to survive the coming winter. The long daylight hours allowed extended foraging activities, and the warm weather made food processing and preservation activities more efficient and effective. The transition into autumn marked the beginning of the most critical period in the annual cycle. This was when successful groups separated themselves from those that would struggle through winter. The timing of autumn activities had to be precise because resources that were not harvested at peak ripeness might be lost to weather or competing animals. Nut harvests, late berry gathering, and final major hunts all had to be coordinated to maximize food storage before winter weather made procurement activities difficult or impossible. The social dynamics of food sharing became even more critical during winter months, when individual procurement efforts yielded minimal returns. Stored foods were carefully rationed to ensure they lasted through the entire winter period, and sharing protocols ensured that no group member starved while others had adequate reserves. These sharing systems created powerful social bonds that held groups together through the most challenging periods of the year. Storytelling and cultural transmission activities reached their peak during long winter evenings, when outdoor activities were limited by weather and darkness. This was when the accumulated knowledge of food procurement techniques was passed to younger generations through detailed narratives that combined practical instruction with entertainment and cultural reinforcement. These stories preserved not just technical knowledge, but also the cultural values and social structures that made successful food procurement possible. The tools and equipment used for food procurement required constant maintenance and replacement activities that continued throughout the year. Winter months provided opportunities for major tool-making projects that prepared equipment for the coming year's activities. Spear points were knapped, nets were repaired, containers were constructed, and hunting strategies were planned and refined through discussion and practice. Innovation in food procurement techniques occurred through systematic experimentation and careful observation of results. Successful innovations were shared within groups and spread to other groups through trade relationships and intermarriage. The cumulative effect of this ongoing innovation was a continuous improvement in food procurement efficiency that allowed human populations to expand into new territories and survive in increasingly challenging environments. The geographic knowledge required for successful food procurement extended far beyond immediate hunting and gathering territories. Groups maintained detailed mental maps that included seasonal resource locations, water sources, shelter sites, and travel routes across hundreds or even thousands of square miles. This knowledge was continuously updated through scouting expeditions and information sharing with other groups, creating a constantly evolving database of environmental conditions and resource availability. Territory management involved complex negotiations between different groups that balanced competition for prime resources with the mutual benefits of cooperation and information sharing. Territorial boundaries were flexible and seasonal, expanding and contracting based on resource availability and group needs. These arrangements prevented overexploitation of any particular area, while ensuring that all groups had access to the resources they needed for survival. The relationship between food procurement activities and spiritual beliefs created cultural practices that reinforced sustainable resource use and group cooperation. Many groups developed rituals and ceremonies that expressed gratitude to the natural world and the animals that provided their sustenance. These spiritual practices served practical functions by encouraging respect for natural resources and promoting sharing behaviours that enhanced group survival. Medical knowledge related to food and nutrition was embedded in traditional food practices that promoted health and prevented nutritional deficiencies. Certain plants were known to have medicinal properties and were incorporated into regular diets, or used specifically to treat illness and injury. The combination of different foods was understood to provide better nutrition than individual foods consumed separately, leading to dietary practices that ensured adequate intake of all essential nutrients. The physical conditioning required for successful food procurement shaped every aspect of daily life and social organization. Individuals who could not contribute effectively to food procurement activities were supported by group sharing systems, but everyone was expected to contribute according to their abilities. This created strong incentives for maintaining physical fitness and developing specialized skills that enhanced group survival capabilities. Training programs for young people were integrated into all food procurement activities, providing hands-on education that began in early childhood and continued throughout adolescence. Children learned by observing and participating in age-appropriate activities, gradually taking on more responsibility as their skills and judgment developed. This educational system ensured that essential knowledge was preserved and transmitted even when experienced adults were lost to accidents or illness. The psychological demands of constant food procurement activities required mental toughness and resilience that enabled individuals to persist through periods of failure and hardship. The uncertainty inherent in hunting and gathering created stress that had to be managed through social support systems and cultural practices that maintained group morale and individual motivation. Success in food procurement required not just physical skills, but also the mental fortitude to continue trying when initial efforts failed. The complexity of decision-making around food procurement extended far beyond simply deciding what to hunt or gather on any given day. These early humans had to constantly evaluate risk versus reward calculations that would determine not just their immediate success, but their long-term survival prospects. A hunting expedition that ventured too far from camp might yield excellent results, but it also increased the risk of getting caught in sudden weather changes or encountering hostile neighbouring groups. Conversely, staying close to familiar territory might feel safer, but it also meant competing with other group members for resources that might already be partially depleted. Weather prediction became a survival skill that required reading subtle environmental cues that modern meteorologists might miss even with sophisticated instruments. The behaviour of birds often provided early warning of approaching storms, as different species would alter their feeding and roosting patterns hours before humans could detect any atmospheric changes. The direction and intensity of winds carried information about weather systems developing far beyond the horizon. Even the way smoke behaved from cooking fires could indicate pressure changes that would affect hunting conditions later in the day. The development of contingency plans was essential because food procurement rarely went according to initial expectations. Hunters might track an animal for hours only to have it disappear into terrain where pursuit was impossible. Gathering expeditions might reach prime locations only to discover that other animals had already harvested the available resources. These setbacks required immediate adaptation and alternative strategies that could salvage at least some benefit from the time and energy already invested. Communication systems during hunting expeditions relied heavily on silent signals that wouldn't alert prey animals to human presence. Hand gestures, body positioning, and subtle movements conveyed complex information about animal locations, hunting strategies, and changing plans. These communication methods were so refined that experienced hunters could coordinate elaborate multi-person hunts without making a single sound that might disturb their quarry. The psychological aspects of hunting required managing fear, excitement, and adrenaline in ways that maintained peak performance under extreme pressure. The moment of striking at large, dangerous game demanded split-second timing and absolute commitment, because hesitation or error could result in serious injury or death. Hunters had to overcome natural survival instincts that urged retreat when confronting powerful animals, instead channeling that energy into focused aggression that would ensure a successful kill. Tracking wounded animals presented unique challenges that combined detective work with endurance testing. A wounded animal might travel for miles before succumbing to its injuries, and following blood trails required skills that went far beyond simply looking for drops of blood on the ground. Experienced trackers could determine the severity of wounds by analysing blood spatter patterns, predict the likely direction of travel based on the animal's species and injury location, and estimate how long the pursuit might continue. The butchering process that followed successful hunts was a race against time and decomposition that required careful coordination among all group members. Large animals had to be processed quickly to prevent spoilage, but the work also had to be done carefully to maximise the usability of every part. Different cuts of meat required different treatment methods, and the sequence of butchering operations had to be planned to ensure that nothing was wasted due to contamination or improper handling. Blood collection was a crucial part of the butchering process because blood provided essential nutrients that were difficult to obtain from other sources. Fresh blood was consumed immediately for its vitamin and mineral content, while larger quantities were processed into blood sausages that could be preserved for later consumption. The techniques for collecting and processing blood had to be executed quickly before coagulation made the blood unsuitable for food preparation. Hide preparation began immediately after an animal was killed, because delays could result in spoilage or damage that would render the hide useless for clothing or shelter materials. The initial skinning process required precise cuts that separated the hide from the carcass without creating holes or weak spots that would compromise its later utility. Different animals required different skinning techniques, and the quality of the finished leather depended heavily on the skill with which this initial processing was performed. The distribution of meat and other animal products followed complex social protocols that reinforced group hierarchies while ensuring that everyone received adequate nutrition. The hunter who made the killing blow might receive choice portions, but sharing obligations ensured that elderly group members, pregnant women, and children also received high-quality protein. These distribution systems created social bonds that extended far beyond individual hunting expeditions. Cooking techniques varied dramatically depending on the type of meat, the available fuel, and the intended use of the finished product. Fresh meat might be roasted quickly over open fires to provide immediate nutrition for hungry hunters, while larger quantities were subjected to slower cooking processes that broke down tough fibers and extracted maximum nutritional value. The timing and temperature control required for different cooking methods demanded constant attention and considerable skill. Smoking operations required specialized knowledge of wood selection and fire management that took years to master. Different types of wood produced different flavors and preservation qualities, and the combination of woods used could dramatically affect the final product. Hardwoods like oak and hickory burned slowly and produced steady smoke, while aromatic woods like cedar and apple added distinctive flavors that also had antimicrobial properties. The construction of smoking structures involved engineering principles that ensured proper air circulation while protecting the meat from rain, insects, and scavengers. These structures had to be tall enough to keep the meat away from the direct heat while allowing smoke to circulate freely around all surfaces. The racks and hangers used to suspend meat had to be strong enough to support significant weight while allowing easy access for monitoring the smoking process. Quality control during food preservation required constant vigilance and immediate response to signs of spoilage or contamination. Meat that showed any signs of off odours, discoloration, or unusual texture had to be discarded immediately to prevent the spread of contamination to other food stores. The economic impact of losing preserved food was severe enough that prevention of spoilage took precedence over almost all other activities. Storage container construction utilized materials and techniques that created sealed environments capable of protecting food from moisture, pests, and temperature fluctuations. Large containers were often made from animal stomachs or specially treated hides that could hold significant quantities of dried meat or processed plant foods. Smaller containers made from bark, hollowed gourds, or woven plant materials served specialized functions for different types of preserved foods. The location selection for food storage sites required understanding of microclimates and geological conditions that would provide optimal preservation conditions. Underground storage pits were positioned to take advantage of natural drainage and stable temperatures, while above-ground storage had to be protected from weather and animal intrusion. The security of these storage sites was critical because their loss could mean starvation during lean periods. Inventory management of stored foods required careful tracking of quantities and quality over extended periods. Groups had to monitor their food reserves constantly to ensure adequate supplies for winter survival, while also identifying items that needed to be consumed before spoilage occurred. This management required mathematical skills and planning abilities that ensured resources were utilized efficiently throughout the storage period. Plant food processing often required more time and labor than hunting activities, but it provided more reliable sources of nutrition that formed the foundation of the diet. The identification of edible plants required encyclopedic knowledge that distinguished between nutritious species and those that were toxic or inedible. Many edible plants closely resembled poisonous varieties, and mistaken identification could result in serious illness or death. Seasonal timing for plant gathering required precision that matched the peak nutritional content of different species with optimal harvesting conditions. Many plants were only edible or nutritious during specific phases of their growth cycles, and missing these windows meant losing access to important food sources. The coordination of gathering multiple activities across plant species required complex scheduling that maximized the efficiency of human labor. Root excavation techniques varied depending on soil conditions, plant species, and the tools available for digging. Some roots grew deep enough to require extensive excavation that could take hours of hard labor to complete. Others grew in dense networks that required careful separation to avoid damaging the plant's ability to regenerate. The digging sticks used for root harvest were specialized tools that had to be maintained and replaced regularly. Processing techniques for toxic or indigestible plants removed harmful compounds while preserving nutritional value. Acorn processing, for example, required repeated leaching with water to remove bitter tannins that could cause digestive problems. This process could take several days of careful attention, with the water changed multiple times to ensure complete removal of unwanted compounds. The finished product was a nutritious flour that could be stored for months. Nut harvesting required timing that captured nuts at peak ripeness, while competing with squirrels, birds, and other animals that also depended on these resources. Many nut species fell from trees during narrow windows of time, and missing these harvest periods meant losing access to concentrated sources of fats and proteins that were essential for survival. The processing for winter of nuts often required specialized tools for cracking shells and extracting meat without contamination. Grinding operations for seeds and nuts required heavy stone tools that could reduce hard materials to fine powders, suitable for cooking or storage. These grinding stones represented significant investments of time and labor to create, and they had to be maintained and reshaped periodically to maintain their effectiveness. The quality of ground meal depended on the skill with which these tools were made and used. Fermentation techniques allowed the preservation and improvement of plant foods through controlled bacterial action that broke down complex compounds and created new flavors and textures. Fermented foods often had better nutritional profiles than fresh materials and could be stored for extended periods without spoilage. The management of fermentation processes required understanding of temperature, moisture, and timing that took years of experience to master. Fiber extraction from plants provided materials for nets, baskets, cordage, and clothing that were essential for food procurement and daily life. Different plants provided fibers with different characteristics, and the selection of appropriate species for specific applications required detailed knowledge of plant properties and processing techniques. The preparation of plant fibers often involved lengthy processes of soaking, beating, and drying that transformed raw materials into usable products. Basket weaving was both an art and a science that produced containers essential for gathering, processing, and storing plant foods. Different weaving patterns and materials created baskets with specific characteristics suited for particular applications. Watertight baskets used for cooking required different techniques than those used for gathering or storage. The durability and functionality of baskets depended on the skill of their construction and the quality of materials used. Textile production from plant and animal fibers created clothing and shelter materials that protected humans from weather extremes while allowing continued food procurement activities. The spinning of fibers into thread required specialized tools and techniques that produced consistent quality suitable for weaving or sewing. Different types of fibers required different processing methods to achieve optimal strength and durability. The integration of hunting and gathering activities required coordination that maximized the efficiency of human labor while ensuring adequate nutrition throughout the year. Some activities could be conducted simultaneously, with different group members specializing in different types of food procurement. Others required the full attention of the entire group during critical periods when timing was seasonal migration for success. Essential patterns were a resource time to coincide with peak availability in different locations, but these movements also had to account for weather conditions, territorial boundaries, and the carrying capacity of new areas. The decision to move from one location to another involved complex calculations that weighed the benefits of new resources against the costs of travel and the risks of entering unfamiliar territory. Leadership roles during food procurement activities were often fluid and situational, with different individuals taking charge based on their expertise in particular areas. A skilled tracker might lead during hunting expeditions, while an experienced plant gatherer would direct gathering activities. This flexible leadership structure ensured that the most knowledgeable person was making decisions in each specialized area. Training programs for young people integrated all aspects of food procurement into comprehensive education systems that produced competent adults capable of contributing to group survival. Children learned through observation and participation, gradually taking on more responsibility as their skills developed. The failure to properly train young people could have catastrophic consequences for long-term group survival. Risk assessment was a constant feature of all food procurement decisions, as groups had to balance immediate needs against long-term sustainability and safety considerations. Activities that might provide excellent short-term results could also deplete resources or create dangers that would compromise future survival. The ability to make sound risk assessments separated successful groups from those that struggled or failed entirely. Innovation in food procurement techniques occurred through systematic experimentation and careful evaluation of results. New methods were tested cautiously to avoid risking essential resources, but successful innovations were quickly adopted and shared with other group members. The cumulative effect of continuous innovation was steady improvements in procurement efficiency and success rates. Quality standards for tools and equipment were maintained through rigorous inspection and immediate replacement of items that showed signs of wear or damage. The failure of critical tools during hunting or gathering expeditions could result in lost opportunities or dangerous situations that threatened group survival. Preventive maintenance and quality control were essential elements of successful food procurement operations. The integration of spiritual beliefs with practical food procurement activities created cultural practices that reinforced sustainable resource use and appropriate behavior during hunting and gathering expeditions. These beliefs often include for animals respect and plants, gratitude for successful procurement, and recognition of the interdependence between humans and their natural environment. Record-keeping systems based on memory and oral tradition preserved information about resource locations, seasonal timing, and procurement techniques across generations. This information was continuously updated and refined through ongoing experience, creating accumulated knowledge bases that represented centuries of trial and error. The loss of this knowledge through the death of experienced individuals could be devastating for group survival capabilities. The complexity of tribal politics around food resources created intricate social webs that determined survival for entire communities. Access to the best hunting grounds wasn't simply a matter of arriving first or being strongest. It required navigating relationships that had been built over generations, honouring agreements made by ancestors, and maintaining alliances that could shift based on seasonal needs and changing circumstances. A group might have exclusive rights to certain fishing spots during salmon runs, but those rights came with obligations to share information about other resources and provide assistance during emergencies. Conflict resolution over food resources required sophisticated diplomatic skills that prevented disputes from escalating into violence that could destroy both communities. When two groups claimed the same territory or resource area, resolution often involved complex negotiations that considered historical precedent, seasonal needs, family relationships, and mutual benefit. Mediators with respected status in both communities would facilitate discussions that might continue for days or weeks until acceptable compromises were reached. Trade relationships extended the effective range of food procurement far beyond what any single group could access through their own territory. Coastal groups with abundant shellfish and seaweed might trade these resources for inland nuts, berries, and game meat. Mountain communities with access to specialized stone materials for tools would exchange these for lowland plant foods and different types of prey animals. These trade networks created economic relationships that spanned hundreds of miles and involved dozens of different groups. The timing of trade activities was carefully coordinated with seasonal resource availability and migration patterns that brought different groups into contact at predetermined locations. Annual gatherings at favourable sites allowed multiple communities to exchange not just food and materials, but also information about resource conditions, new procurement techniques, and territorial changes that might affect future activities. These gatherings reinforced social bonds and cultural traditions that maintained peaceful relationships across vast regions. Quality control in trade relationships required standardized measures and agreed upon values that ensured fair exchanges between communities with different resource bases. A certain quantity of dried salmon might be considered equivalent to a specific number of worked stone tools or a particular amount of processed plant foods. These exchange rates were negotiated based on the relative difficulty of procurement and the seasonal availability of different resources. Information sharing during trade gatherings included detailed discussions of environmental conditions, animal behaviour patterns, and plant growth cycles that affected food procurement across entire regions. A group that had observed unusual migration patterns might share this information with trading partners who could adjust their own hunting strategies accordingly. Knowledge about new processing techniques or improved tools spread rapidly through these networks, raising procurement efficiency across entire cultural areas. Marriage relationships between groups created kinship networks that facilitated resource sharing and mutual support during periods of scarcity. A woman who married into a neighbouring community maintained connections to her birth family that could provide assistance when her new group faced food shortages. Children from these unions carried knowledge and skills from both communities, creating individuals who could serve as bridges between different groups and their specialized procurement techniques. The education of children in multi-group families required careful balance between different cultural traditions and procurement methods that might conflict or complement each other. A child might learn coastal fishing techniques from one parent and inland hunting methods from the other, creating individuals with broader skill sets than those available to members of single communities. These cross-trained individuals often became valuable mediators and innovators who combined techniques from different traditions. Seasonal labour sharing allowed groups to take advantage of brief periods of resource abundance that required more workers than any single community could provide. During major salmon runs or massive nut harvests, multiple groups might cooperate in procurement activities that benefited everyone involved. The coordination of these efforts required advanced planning and clear agreements about how the resulting resources would be distributed among participating communities. Emergency assistance protocols ensured that groups facing temporary food crises could receive help from neighbouring communities without losing face or compromising their independence. These assistance relationships were based on reciprocity, with the understanding that groups providing help today might need similar support in the future. The management of these relationships required careful attention to maintaining balance and avoiding the creation of permanent dependencies. Territorial expansion and contraction followed natural cycles that reflected changing environmental conditions and population pressures that affected resource availability. During periods of abundance, group territories might expand as communities grew and needed access to more resources. Environmental stress or population decline could result in territorial contraction that concentrated remaining members in the most productive areas. Border maintenance required constant attention and occasional renegotiation as environmental conditions changed and resource availability shifted over time. Boundary markers might include natural features like rivers or mountain ridges, but they could also be artificial constructions that required periodic renewal and community agreements. The crossing of territorial boundaries without permission was a serious offence that could trigger conflicts with potentially deadly consequences. Scouting expeditions beyond established territories served both intelligence gathering and opportunity assessment functions that informed long-term strategic planning. These expeditions identified new resource areas, assessed the activities of neighbouring groups, and evaluated potential expansion opportunities or threats that might require defensive preparations. The information gathered during scouting activities was carefully guarded and shared only with trusted community members. Environmental monitoring required constant observation of conditions that might affect food resource availability months or even years in advance. Changes in weather patterns, animal populations, or plant growth cycles could provide early warning of coming abundance or scarcity that would require adjustments in procurement strategies. Groups that excelled at environmental prediction often enjoyed significant advantages over those that reacted only to immediate conditions. Adaptation strategies for environmental changes required flexibility in procurement methods and social organisation that allowed communities to survive conditions that differed significantly from historical norms. Extended droughts might force groups to rely more heavily on drought-resistant plant foods and change their hunting patterns to focus on animals that could survive with limited water sources. Unusually harsh winters might require different preservation techniques and more intensive resource sharing to ensure community survival. The development of backup plans for procurement failures required thinking through multiple scenarios and maintaining alternative strategies that could be implemented quickly when primary methods proved unsuccessful. These contingency plans might involve shifting to different hunting grounds, changing the focus from large game to smaller prey, or intensifying gathering activities to compensate for hunting failures. Tool redundancy ensured that essential equipment failures wouldn't compromise critical food procurement activities. Multiple spear points, backup bowstrings, and spare digging sticks meant that broken or lost equipment could be quickly replaced without interrupting ongoing activities. The maintenance of tool inventories required significant investment of time and materials, but it provided insurance against equipment failures at critical moments. Skill redundancy within groups ensured that essential knowledge and abilities weren't lost when individual experts were injured, ill, or killed. Multiple group members needed to master critical skills like tracking, tool making, and food processing so that procurement activities could continue even when key individuals were unavailable. This redundancy required extensive training programs and careful succession planning that prepared replacements for essential roles. Knowledge preservation systems based on storytelling, demonstration, and ritual practice ensured that critical information survived the deaths of individual experts and was transmitted accurately to future generations. Complex procurement techniques were embedded in stories that were entertaining enough to be remembered and repeated, while practical skills were taught through hands-on training that continued until students achieved mastery. Innovation. Encouragement balanced the need for proven techniques with the benefits of experimentation that might lead to improved methods or entirely new approaches to food procurement. Successful innovations were quickly adopted and shared, while failed experiments provided learning opportunities that informed future attempts. The willingness to try new approaches while maintaining proven backup methods was essential for long-term survival and prosperity. Performance evaluation of procurement activities required honest assessment of success rates, efficiency measures, and resource utilization that identified areas needing improvement. Groups that consistently failed to meet their nutritional needs had to analyze their methods and make changes that addressed underlying problems. This evaluation process required objective analysis that might traditional approaches challenge and established hierarchies. Resource allocation decisions determined how much time and energy would be devoted to different types of procurement activities based on seasonal conditions, group needs, and available opportunities. The balance between hunting and gathering efforts had to be adjusted constantly to optimize returns on labor investment while ensuring adequate nutrition for all group members. Labor specialization within groups created efficiency gains that allowed communities to achieve better results with the same amount of human effort. Individuals could focus on developing expertise in particular areas while relying on others for different types of food and materials. This specialization required coordination and trust that ensured everyone's needs were met despite their narrow focus areas. Productivity measurements helped groups understand which procurement activities provided the best returns on time and energy investment under different conditions. Activities that required significant effort but provided minimal nutrition might be abandoned in favor of more efficient alternatives. These measurements required careful tracking of inputs and outputs that informed future planning and resource allocation decisions. Efficiency improvements in procurement techniques were achieved through continuous refinement of methods, tools, and strategies that reduced wasted effort while increasing success rates. Small improvements in tool design or hunting techniques could result in significant gains over time, while major innovations might revolutionize entire categories of food procurement activities. Success metrics for food procurement went beyond simple measures of quantity to include considerations of nutritional quality, preservation potential, and social benefits that contributed to overall group welfare. A hunt that provided not just meat but also materials for tools and clothing might be considered more successful than one that yielded only food, even if the food quantity was larger. Failure analysis of unsuccessful procurement attempts identified patterns and causes that could be addressed through changes in strategy, timing, or technique. Understanding why particular approaches failed helped groups avoid repeating mistakes and develop more effective methods for similar situations in the future. Competition analysis involved monitoring the procurement activities of neighbouring groups to identify successful techniques that might be adopted or competitive pressures that required strategic responses. Groups that learned from their neighbours' successes and failures often achieved better results than those that relied only on their own experience and innovation. Market dynamics in trade relationships required understanding supply and demand factors that affected the relative value of different resources and the terms of exchange between communities. Abundant resources commanded lower trade values, while scarce materials could be exchanged for significant quantities of more common items. Economic planning for resource procurement required long-term thinking that balanced immediate needs against future requirements and investment opportunities. Groups had to decide how much effort to devote to immediate consumption versus preservation and storage activities that would provide security during lean periods. Investment strategies in tool production, territory improvement, and skill development required sacrificing short-term procurement opportunities for long-term benefits that would improve future success rates. These investments might not pay off for months or years, but they were essential for maintaining competitive advantages over time. Return calculations for different procurement activities helped groups make rational decisions about where to focus their limited time and energy resources. Activities with higher returns relative to efforts invested received priority, while less efficient approaches were used only when better alternatives weren't available. Risk management in food procurement required balancing the potential rewards of high-risk activities against the possibility of failure that could compromise group survival. High-risk hunts for large game might provide enormous benefits if successful, but they also carried the possibility of injury or complete failure that could leave the group without food. Insurance strategies involved maintaining diverse procurement activities and resource reserves that provided security against the failure of any single approach. Groups that relied too heavily on one type of food source were vulnerable to environmental changes or resource depletion that could threaten their survival. Portfolio diversification in food procurement meant maintaining expertise and capabilities across multiple types of hunting, gathering, and processing activities that provided resilience against changing conditions. Groups with diverse skill sets and resource bases were better able to adapt to environmental changes and take advantage of new opportunities. Hedging techniques involved maintaining backup plans and alternative strategies that could be implemented quickly when primary procurement methods encountered problems. These hedging strategies might involve developing relationships with trading partners who could provide resources during emergencies, or maintaining knowledge of alternative food sources that could be utilized when preferred resources became unavailable. Contingency planning for extreme scenarios prepared groups for environmental disasters, resource collapses, or social conflicts that could severely disrupt normal procurement activities. These plans included emergency food reserves, alternative shelter locations, and evacuation procedures that could be implemented quickly when normal survival strategies became inadequate. Crisis management protocols established clear procedures for responding to immediate threats to group survival that required rapid decision-making and coordinated action. These protocols covered everything from severe weather events to attacks by hostile groups or dangerous animals that threatened the communities to procure food safely. Recovery planning for post-crisis situations focused on rebuilding procurement capabilities and resource reserves after major disruptions to normal activities. These recovery plans addressed the restoration of damaged equipment, the re-establishment of territorial control, and the renewal of trade relationships that had been disrupted by crisis events. Resilience building involved developing community characteristics and capabilities that enabled groups to survive and recover from major challenges without losing their essential cultural identity and survival skills. Resilient communities maintained strong social bonds, diverse skill sets, and flexible strategies that could be adapted to changing circumstances. Sustainability planning ensured that current procurement activities didn't compromise the long-term availability of resources that would be needed by future generations. This planning required understanding carrying capacity limits and implementing harvest restrictions that maintained resource populations at sustainable levels. Conservation practices in food procurement involved techniques that minimized waste and environmental impact while maintaining adequate nutrition for community members. These practices included selective harvesting methods that allowed resource populations to regenerate and processing techniques that utilized entire animals or plants without waste. Regeneration strategies actively worked to improve the productivity of hunting and gathering territories through activities that enhanced natural resource populations. These strategies might include controlled burning to improve plant growth, construction of fish spawning areas, or protection of critical habitat areas during sensitive periods. Stewardship responsibilities created obligations for groups to maintain and improve the territories they controlled for the benefit of future generations. These responsibilities included preventing overexploitation of resources, protecting critical habitat areas, and sharing knowledge about sustainable procurement practices with neighbouring communities. Legacy planning involved preparing future generations to maintain successful procurement traditions while adapting to changing conditions that might require new approaches. This planning included comprehensive education programs, careful succession planning for leadership roles, and the preservation of cultural knowledge that supported successful procurement activities. The knowledge systems that governed successful food procurement were far more sophisticated than simple trial and error learning. These early humans developed complex classification systems that categorized thousands of different species based on their usefulness, seasonal availability, and processing requirements. Each animal was understood not just as a potential food source, but as part of an intricate web of relationships that affected when and where it could be found, what other species might be encountered in the same areas, and how its behavior would change throughout the year. The classification of plants was equally detailed, with distinctions made not just between edible and inedible species, but between varieties that provided different types of nutrition, required different processing methods, or were available at different times. Some plants were valued primarily for their seeds, others for their roots, and still others for their leaves or bark. The same plant might be useful in different ways at different stages of its growth cycle, requiring procurement specialists to maintain calendars in their heads that tracked dozens of different harvest opportunities throughout the year. Animal behavior prediction required understanding motivations and instincts that went far beyond simple observation of movement patterns. These early humans knew that certain weather conditions would cause animals to change their feeding schedules, that the presence of predators in an area would alter the behavior of prey species for days or weeks afterward, and that seasonal changes in food availability would cause dramatic shifts in animal distribution across the landscape. This behavioural knowledge allowed hunters to position themselves where animals would be, rather than where they currently were. The prediction of plant growth cycles involved reading environmental cues that indicated when different species would begin growing, reach peak nutritional value, or complete their reproductive cycles. The timing of leaf emergence in certain trees indicated when ground plants would begin their spring growth. The flowering patterns of early blooming species predicted when later species would be ready for harvest indicators create. These naturaled a biological calendar that was far more accurate than any artificial timing system. Weather interpretation skills enabled these groups to make procurement decisions based on atmospheric conditions that would affect success rates hours or days in the future. Cloud formations indicated not just immediate precipitation, but wind patterns that would influence animal movement and plant growth. Pressure changes that modern humans can barely perceive provided information about storm systems developing far beyond the visible horizon. Temperature fluctuations predicted growing conditions that would affect plant development weeks in advance. The development of procurement schedules required integrating animal behavior, plant cycles, weather patterns, and social factors into comprehensive plans that maximized the efficiency of human labor throughout the year. These schedules had to account for the physical limitations of group members, the availability of necessary tools and materials, and the competing demands of other essential activities like shelter maintenance and tool production. The coordination required to execute these complex schedules demanded leadership skills and communication abilities that ensured everyone understood their roles and timing. Territory utilization involved rotating between different areas to prevent overexploitation while allowing natural populations to recover and regenerate. Groups developed a sophisticated understanding of how long different resources needed to recover from harvesting pressure. Nut groves might be visited only every few years to allow trees to rebuild their energy reserves. Hunting grounds were rested periodically to allow game populations to stabilize. Root gathering areas were harvested selectively to ensure continued plant reproduction. The maintenance of multiple procurement sites required extensive travel and detailed knowledge of conditions across vast areas. Groups might maintain hunting camps, plant gathering areas, tool material sources, and seasonal shelters across territories that encompassed hundreds of square miles. The logistics of moving between these sites, maintaining equipment caches, and coordinating activities across such large areas required organizational skills that rivaled those of modern businesses. Resource mapping in the minds of these early humans created detailed geographical databases that included not just the locations of food sources, but information about access routes, seasonal conditions, and potential hazards associated with each area. These mental maps were continuously updated through scouting expeditions and shared information from other groups. The accuracy and detail of these mental maps was essential for successful navigation across landscapes that lacked any artificial markers or reference points. Navigation techniques for long-distance travel relied on natural landmarks, celestial observations, and environmental cues that provided direction and distance information across unfamiliar terrain. The position of stars provided directional guidance during night travel. Mountain ranges, river valleys, and distinctive rock formations served as landmarks that could be recognized from great distances. Vegetation patterns and animal sign indicated proximity to water sources and territories familiar. Travel planning for procurement expeditions required calculating distances, estimating travel times, and preparing supplies for journeys that might last days or weeks. These expeditions had to carry not just personal supplies, but also the tools and materials needed for successful procurement activities at distant locations. The weight and bulk of necessary equipment had to be balanced against the physical capabilities of expedition members and the anticipated returns from the journey. Emergency procedures for lost or injured expedition members established protocols that maximize survival chances while minimizing risks to the rest of the group. These procedures included rally points, where separated members could reunite, signal systems for communicating across distances, and evacuation plans for transporting injured individuals back to base camps. The implementation of these procedures required discipline and training that prepared group members for crisis situations. Communication systems for coordinating procurement activities across large areas utilized natural sound phenomena, smoke signals, and pre-arranged meeting schedules that kept scattered groups in contact. Sound signals using animal calls or percussion instruments could convey complex information about hunting success, danger warnings, or requests for assistance across distances of several miles. Smoke signals visible from mountain peaks could communicate basic information across even greater distances. Information networks between groups created intelligence systems that tracked resource conditions, weather patterns, and potential threats across entire regions. These networks operated through formal meetings, casual encounters, and message systems that kept communities informed about conditions beyond their immediate territories. The accuracy and timeliness of this information often determined the success or failure of major procurement expeditions. Alliance building with neighbouring groups created mutual support systems that enhanced procurement capabilities while providing security against hostile communities or environmental disasters. These alliances involved formal agreements about territorial boundaries, resource-sharing protocols, and mutual defence arrangements that could be activated when member communities face threats beyond their individual capabilities to handle. Diplomatic protocols for intergroup relations established procedures for resolving conflicts, negotiating agreements, and maintaining peaceful relationships that supported successful procurement activities. These protocols covered everything from accidental territorial violations to disputes over resource rights. The diplomatic skills required to navigate these complex relationships were as important as hunting and gathering abilities for long-term community survival. Cultural exchange programs facilitated the sharing of procurement techniques, tool designs, and environmental knowledge between communities with different specializations and resource bases. Young adults might spend months or years with other groups, learning new skills and bringing back innovations that improved their home community's procurement capabilities. These exchanges created networks of shared knowledge that benefited entire regional populations. Intermarriage strategies between groups created kinship bonds that facilitated resource sharing and mutual support, while introducing new genetic diversity and cultural knowledge into communities. Marriage negotiations often included agreements about resource access rights and mutual assistance obligations that extended far beyond the immediate families involved. These marriages created individuals with loyalties and knowledge spanning multiple communities. Conflict resolution mechanisms prevented disputes over resources from escalating into violence that could disrupt procurement activities and threaten community survival. These mechanisms included mediation procedures, compensation systems, and ritual competitions that allowed groups to resolve disagreements without resorting to warfare. The effectiveness of these mechanisms often determined whether communities could coexist peacefully in resource-rich areas. Warfare planning for conflicts that couldn't be resolved through peaceful means involved strategies that protected procurement capabilities while neutralizing threats from hostile groups. These plans included defensive preparations for protecting resource areas, offensive strategies for eliminating threats, and evacuation procedures for moving valuable resources and vulnerable community members to safety. Intelligence gathering about potentially hostile groups involved monitoring their movements, assessing their capabilities, and identifying their intentions toward neighboring communities. This intelligence was gathered through scouting expeditions, information from traders and travelers, and observation of territorial behaviors that might indicate aggressive intentions. Defense strategies for protecting procurement areas included both passive measures, like concealment and early warning systems, and active defenses like fortified positions and coordinated resistance plans. These strategies had to balance the need for security against the accessibility requirements of ongoing procurement activities. Over-fortification could make areas unusable for normal activities, while inadequate defences left resources vulnerable to raiders. Offensive capabilities for dealing with persistent threats included raid planning, siege techniques, and psychological warfare methods that could neutralize hostile groups without requiring extended conflicts that would disrupt normal procurement activities. These capabilities were typically used only when defensive measures proved inadequate and the threat to community survival was immediate and severe. Recovery planning for post-conflict situations addressed the restoration of procurement activities after periods of warfare or raiding that had disrupted normal resource gathering. These plans included damage assessment procedures, resource replacement strategies, and community reorganization methods that could quickly restore procurement capabilities once security was re-established. The seasonal rhythms that governed procurement activities created annual cycles of intense activity, alternating with periods of relative rest that allowed for equipment, maintenance, social activities, and cultural transmission. Spring represented renewal and preparation, with tool-making, territory scouting, and planning for the coming year's activities. Summer brought peak procurement intensity, as both animal and plant resources reached maximum availability. Autumn marked the critical transition period when groups had to complete their preparations for winter survival while continuing to take advantage of late-season resource opportunities. This was often the most stressful period of the year, as the success or failure of autumn activities would determine whether the group would survive the coming winter in comfort or face starvation before spring returned. Winter survival strategies varied dramatically, depending on climate conditions and available resources, but all required careful management of stored foods and continued procurement of whatever resources remained available during cold months. Some groups maintained active hunting and gathering throughout winter, while others relied primarily on stored resources, supplemented by limited procurement activities focused on the most reliable winter food sources. The transition back to spring represented both relief at surviving another winter and anxiety about rebuilding depleted resources before the next annual cycle. Spring procurement activities had to balance the immediate need for fresh foods after months of preserved rations against the longer-term need to begin rebuilding reserves for the following winter. Activity coordination throughout these seasonal cycles required leadership skills that could motivate group members during periods of intense activity while maintaining morale during difficult periods when success was limited. Leaders had to make decisions about resource allocation, activity prioritization, and risk management that affected the survival of entire communities. Motivational techniques for maintaining group effort during challenging periods utilized cultural practices, social recognition, and shared purpose that kept individuals committed to collective goals, even when personal motivation flagged. These techniques included storytelling that reinforced cultural values, ceremonies that celebrated successful procurement, and social structures that ensured individual contributions were recognized and valued. Performance standards for procurement activities established expectations for individual and group achievement that motivated excellence while maintaining realistic goals that could be achieved under normal conditions. These standards covered not just quantity measures like numbers of animals killed or amounts of plant foods gathered, but also quality measures like the condition of preserved foods and the efficiency of processing activities. Skill development programs for improving procurement capabilities provided structured learning opportunities that helped individuals master complex techniques and advance to higher levels of expertise. These programs combined formal instruction with hands-on practice and gradually increasing responsibility that prepared individuals to contribute more effectively to group procurement efforts. Quality control measures for tools, equipment, and processed foods ensured that essential items met the standards necessary for successful procurement and survival. These measures included inspection procedures, replacement schedules, and improvement processes that maintained equipment effectiveness while identifying opportunities for enhancement. Innovation incentives encouraged experimentation and creativity that led to improved procurement methods and new technologies that enhanced group capabilities. These incentives included recognition for successful innovations, resources for experimentation, and protection from criticism when experiments failed to produce useful results. Knowledge preservation systems ensured that critical procurement information survived the loss of individual experts and was transmitted accurately to future generations. These systems included redundant storage of information across multiple individuals, regular review and updating of knowledge, and formal transmission procedures that verified understanding before knowledge holders were considered fully trained. Succession planning for leadership roles prepared replacements for key positions before current leaders became unable to fulfill their responsibilities. This planning identified promising candidates, provided them with necessary training and experience, and established procedures for smooth transitions that maintained continuity in procurement leadership. Adaptation mechanisms allowed groups to adjust their procurement strategies and techniques in response to changing environmental conditions or new challenges that required different approaches. These mechanisms included environmental monitoring systems that provided early warning of changing conditions, decision-making processes that could quickly implement new strategies, and communication systems that ensured all group members understood and could implement necessary changes. Learning systems captured lessons from both successful and failed procurement attempts and incorporated this knowledge into future planning and training activities. These systems included formal debriefing procedures, information storage methods, and regular review processes that ensured valuable experience wasn't lost or forgotten. Improvement processes systematically enhanced procurement capabilities through incremental refinements in techniques, tools, and strategies that accumulated over time to produce significant gains in effectiveness and efficiency. These processes included regular evaluation of current methods, identification of improvement opportunities, implementation of changes, and assessment of results to verify that improvements had been achieved. The complexity of managing all these interconnected systems required cognitive abilities and social skills that challenged even the most capable individuals. The mental workload of tracking environmental conditions, resource availability, group needs, equipment status, social relationships, and seasonal timing demanded exceptional memory and analytical capabilities that few modern humans would be able to match. Decision-making processes had to integrate information from multiple sources and consider numerous variables that might affect the outcomes of procurement activities. The consequences of poor decisions could be severe enough to threaten group survival, creating pressure for accuracy and wisdom that demanded the best thinking abilities these early humans could muster. Problem-solving skills were constantly tested by unexpected challenges and changing conditions that required creative solutions and rapid adaptation. The ability to generate effective solutions under pressure, with limited resources and incomplete information, was essential for procurement success and community survival. Leadership responsibilities in procurement activities required individuals who could coordinate complex activities, motivate group members, make critical decisions under pressure, and maintain group cohesion during challenging periods. These leadership skills were developed through experience and mentorship, but they also required natural abilities that not all individuals possessed. The social dynamics of procurement groups created interpersonal challenges that had to be managed carefully to maintain the cooperation essential for successful activities. Personality conflicts, competition for status, and disagreements about strategies all had to be resolved in ways that preserved group effectiveness while maintaining individual motivation and commitment. Communication requirements for coordinating complex procurement activities demanded clarity, accuracy, and timeliness that ensured all group members understood their roles and responsibilities. Miscommunication could result in failed hunts, missed gathering opportunities, or dangerous situations that threatened individual and group safety. Training responsibilities for developing procurement skills in younger group members required patience, teaching ability, and comprehensive knowledge that could be transmitted effectively to students with varying levels of ability and motivation. The failure to properly train replacement personnel could compromise long-term community survival, as older experts became unable to continue. The integration, their contributions of procurement activities with other essential community functions like tool-making, shelter construction, and social activities required time management and prioritization skills that balanced competing demands for limited human resources. Groups had to maintain capabilities across all necessary areas while focusing enough effort on procurement to ensure adequate nutrition and survival. Resource allocation decisions affected not just immediate procurement success, but also long-term community development and capability enhancement. Groups had to balance current consumption needs against investment in tools, training, and infrastructure that would improve future procurement capabilities, but required sacrificing immediate resources. Strategic planning for long-term procurement sustainability required these early groups to think far beyond immediate needs and consider how their current activities would affect resource availability for years or even decades into the future. This forward-thinking approach involved understanding natural regeneration cycles, predicting environmental changes, and making decisions that balanced present survival needs against future resource security. Groups that excelled at this type of planning often thrived, while those focused only on immediate returns struggled during periods of environmental stress or resource depletion. The development of procurement calendars that integrated multiple resource types, seasonal variations, and group capabilities created comprehensive scheduling systems that maximized efficiency while minimizing conflicts between different activities. These calendars had to account for the fact that different resources peaked at different times, required different processing methods, and involved different group members with varying skill sets. The coordination required to execute these complex schedules demanded sophisticated organizational abilities that ensured nothing was overlooked and no opportunities were missed. Weather pattern recognition extended far beyond simple observation of immediate conditions to include understanding of atmospheric cycles that might affect resource availability weeks. These or months in advance, early humans developed the ability to read subtle environmental cues that indicated developing weather patterns long before they became obvious to casual observers. Changes in animal behavior, plant growth patterns, and atmospheric conditions provided early warning systems that allowed groups to adjust their procurement strategies before adverse conditions arrived. The management of group energy and motivation throughout long procurement cycles required leadership skills that could maintain enthusiasm and commitment during periods of limited success, while preventing overexertion during times of abundance. These leaders had to understand the physical and psychological limitations of group members and pace activities in ways that sustained effort over extended periods without causing burnout or injury that would compromise future capabilities. Tool maintenance and replacement programs ensured that essential equipment remained functional throughout demanding procurement activities that could quickly wear out or damage poorly maintained implements. These programs involved regular inspection schedules, preventive maintenance procedures, and replacement protocols that ensured backup equipment was available when primary tools failed. The investment of time and resources in tool maintenance was essential for preventing equipment failures that could compromise critical procurement opportunities. Skill redundancy within procurement teams created multiple layers of expertise that ensured essential capabilities weren't lost when individual specialists became unavailable due to injury, illness, or other circumstances. This redundancy required extensive cross-training programs that developed backup specialists while maintaining primary expertise levels. The challenge was providing enough training to create competent replacements without diluting the advanced skills of primary specialists. Information management systems preserved and organized the vast amounts of knowledge required for successful procurement across multiple resource types, seasonal cycles, and environmental conditions. These systems had to store information about thousands of different species, hundreds of procurement techniques, and countless environmental relationships that affected resource availability. The accuracy and accessibility of this information often determined the success or failure of critical procurement decisions. Quality assurance procedures for processed foods ensured that preservation activities produced safe, nutritious products that would remain edible throughout storage periods that might last many months. These procedures involved monitoring temperature, moisture, and contamination levels during processing, while implementing storage methods that prevented spoilage and maintained nutritional value. The failure of quality assurance could result in food poisoning or nutritional deficiencies that threatened individual and group health. Efficiency optimization in procurement activities involved constantly refining techniques and strategies to achieve better results with less effort and fewer resources. This optimization required careful analysis of current methods, identification of improvement opportunities, and systematic testing of new approaches that might enhance productivity. Small improvements in efficiency could accumulate over time to produce significant gains in overall procurement capabilities. Risk assessment for procurement expeditions evaluated potential dangers and benefits associated with different activities to guide decision-making that balanced opportunity against safety considerations. These assessments had to consider weather conditions, territorial risks, equipment reliability, and group capabilities when determining whether particular procurement opportunities were worth pursuing. The ability to make accurate risk assessments often determined whether groups achieved their goals or faced dangerous situations that threatened survival. Contingency planning for procurement failures developed alternative strategies that could be implemented quickly when primary approaches proved unsuccessful. These contingency plans included backup resource locations, alternative procurement methods, and emergency protocols that could maintain group nutrition when preferred activities failed to produce expected results. The existence of well-developed contingency plans provided security and confidence that enabled groups to pursue higher risk opportunities with better potential returns. Resource conservation strategies ensured that current procurement activities didn't compromise future resource availability through overexploitation or environmental damage. These strategies involved selective harvesting techniques that maintained breeding populations, rotation systems that allowed resources to recover between exploitation periods, and habitat protection measures that preserved the environmental conditions necessary for continued resource production. Innovation diffusion mechanisms facilitated the spread of successful procurement techniques and technologies between different groups and across large geographic areas. These mechanisms included formal exchange programs, informal knowledge sharing during trade activities, and systematic observation of other groups' methods during territorial encounters. The rapid spread of useful innovations enhanced procurement capabilities across entire cultural regions. Performance evaluation systems measured the effectiveness of different procurement strategies and identified areas where improvements might be needed. These systems tracked success rates, resource utilization efficiency, and group welfare outcomes that indicated whether current approaches were meeting community needs. Regular evaluation allowed groups to adjust their strategies before problems became serious enough to threaten survival. Training standardization ensured that essential procurement skills were transmitted consistently and completely to new practitioners who needed to achieve competency quickly. These standards defined the knowledge and abilities required for different specializations while establishing testing procedures that verified skill development. Standardized training prevented knowledge gaps that could compromise procurement effectiveness when experienced practitioners became unavailable. Communication protocols for procurement coordination established clear procedures for sharing information, making decisions, and implementing plans that involved multiple individuals with different roles and responsibilities. These protocols covered everything from silent hunting signals to complex planning discussions that required input from various specialists. Effective communication was essential for coordinating activities that required precise timing and coordination. Conflict resolution procedures for procurement disputes provided methods for resolving disagreements about strategies, resource allocation, and individual responsibilities without disrupting group cohesion or procurement effectiveness. These procedures included mediation techniques, decision-making protocols, and appeal processes that ensured conflicts were resolved fairly and quickly. Unresolved conflicts could seriously compromise the cooperation essential for successful group procurement activities. Cultural preservation activities maintained the traditions, beliefs, and practices that supported successful procurement while adapting to changing conditions that required new approaches. These activities included storytelling traditions that preserved technical knowledge, ceremonial practices that reinforced group values, and social structures that maintained effective cooperation. Cultural preservation ensured that successful procurement traditions survived even as specific techniques and strategies evolved. Knowledge integration systems combined information from different sources and specializations to create comprehensive understanding that supported effective procurement decision-making. These systems had to reconcile sometimes conflicting information while identifying patterns and relationships that weren't obvious when examining individual data sources. Effective knowledge integration allowed groups to make decisions based on complete understanding rather than partial information. Succession planning for procurement leadership identified and prepared future leaders who could maintain effective coordination and decision-making when current leaders became unable to fulfill their responsibilities. This planning involved identifying individuals with leadership potential, providing them with necessary training and experience, and establishing transition procedures that maintained continuity in procurement management. Leadership succession was critical for maintaining group effectiveness over extended periods. Adaptive management approaches allowed procurement strategies to evolve in response to changing environmental conditions, resource availability, and group needs that required different approaches than those used in the past. These approaches included monitoring systems that detected changes requiring adaptation, decision-making processes that could implement new strategies quickly, and evaluation methods that assessed the effectiveness of adaptive changes. System integration challenges required managing the complex interactions between different aspects of procurement activities to ensure that changes in one area didn't create problems in others. These challenges included coordinating hunting and gathering activities, balancing immediate consumption against food preservation needs and activities. Demands of different seasonal managing the competing effective system integration required understanding these complex relationships and managing them skillfully. Scaling strategies address the challenges of maintaining procurement effectiveness as group sizes change due to population growth, environmental stress, or social reorganization. These strategies included methods for expanding procurement capabilities to serve larger groups, techniques for maintaining effectiveness with reduced personnel, and approaches for splitting or merging groups while preserving essential capabilities. Scaling challenges required careful planning and execution to avoid disrupting successful procurement systems. Technology transfer processes facilitated the adoption of new tools, techniques, and strategies that could improve procurement effectiveness. These processes included evaluation procedures for assessing new technologies, training programs for implementing them effectively, and integration methods for incorporating them into existing procurement systems. Successful technology transfer could dramatically improve group capabilities, while poor implementation could disrupt effective existing systems. Environmental monitoring systems tracked changes in resource availability, weather patterns, and ecological conditions that might affect procurement success. These systems included observation networks that covered large territorial areas, information processing methods that identified significant changes, and communication procedures that ensured relevant information reached decision makers quickly. Effective environmental monitoring provided early warning of changes requiring strategic adjustments. Productivity measurement systems evaluated the effectiveness of different procurement activities in terms of energy expenditure, resource yields, and group welfare outcomes. These systems provided information needed for resource allocation decisions, strategy evaluation, and performance improvement activities. Accurate productivity measurement helped groups optimize their procurement efforts and identify opportunities for improvement. Capacity building activities developed the skills, knowledge, and capabilities needed to maintain and improve procurement effectiveness over time. These activities included training programs for new practitioners, skill development initiatives for existing group members, and infrastructure improvements that enhanced procurement capabilities. Capacity building was essential for maintaining long-term procurement success as conditions changed and new challenges emerged. The psychological aspects of procurement activities required managing stress, fear, and uncertainty that could interfere with effective performance during critical activities. These psychological challenges included performance anxiety during high-stakes hunts, fear responses that could compromise safety during dangerous activities, and decision paralysis when facing complex choices with uncertain outcomes. Groups had to develop mental conditioning techniques that maintained peak performance under pressure. Social cohesion maintenance during procurement activities required managing interpersonal relationships and group dynamics that could either enhance or undermine collective effectiveness. These social challenges included personality conflicts between team members, competition for status and recognition, and disagreements about strategies and priorities. Effective social management created group environments that supported cooperation and individual excellence. Stress management techniques helped individuals and groups cope with the physical and psychological demands of intensive procurement activities that could continue for extended periods under challenging conditions. These techniques included rest and recovery protocols, stress reduction practices, and psychological support systems that maintained individual and group resilience during difficult periods. Effective stress management prevented burnout and maintained long-term procurement capabilities. Individual development programs within procurement teams recognized that different people had different strengths, interests, and developmental needs that required customized approaches to skill building and role assignment. These programs included assessment procedures for identifying individual capabilities, training plans tailored to specific needs and goals, and career development paths that allowed individuals to advance their skills and contributions over time. Group dynamics management addressed the complex interpersonal relationships and communication patterns that either facilitated or hindered effective procurement coordination. These dynamics included leadership relationships, decision-making processes, communication patterns, and conflict resolution mechanisms that determined how well groups functioned as cohesive units. Effective group dynamics created environments where individual talents were maximized and collective goals were achieved. Motivation maintenance systems sustained individual and group commitment to procurement goals during periods of limited success, challenging conditions, or competing priorities that might reduce focus and effort. These systems included recognition programs that acknowledged individual contributions, goal-setting processes that maintained clear purposes, and reward mechanisms that reinforced desired behaviors and achievements. Team-building activities created strong interpersonal bonds and shared purpose that enhanced cooperation and coordination during complex procurement activities that required precise teamwork. These activities included shared experiences that built trust and mutual respect, communication exercises that improved understanding and coordination, and problem-solving challenges that developed collective capabilities. Leadership development programs prepared individuals to take on greater responsibilities in procurement coordination and decision-making as they gained experience and demonstrated capabilities. These programs included mentorship relationships with experienced leaders, graduated responsibility assignments that built leadership skills, and formal training in decision-making, communication, and conflict resolution techniques. Decision-making frameworks provided systematic approaches for evaluating options and making choices that affected procurement success and group welfare. These frameworks included information gathering procedures, analysis methods for evaluating alternatives, and implementation processes that ensured decisions were executed effectively. Good decision-making frameworks improved the quality and consistency of critical choices. Problem-solving methodologies offered structured approaches for addressing challenges and obstacles that interfered with successful procurement activities. These methodologies included problem identification techniques, root cause analysis methods, solution development processes, and implementation strategies that resolved issues effectively. Systematic problem-solving prevented minor issues from becoming major obstacles. The integration of procurement activities with broader community life required balancing the demands of food acquisition against other essential activities like shelter maintenance, tool production, social activities, and cultural practices. This balance was critical because overemphasis on procurement could neglect other needs that were also essential for long-term survival and community well-being. Community resource allocation decisions determined how much time, energy, and materials would be devoted to procurement activities versus other community needs like defense, shelter improvement, tool making, and social activities. These decisions required understanding the relative importance of different activities under current conditions while long-term community maintaining development goals. Social structure on procurement activities included the ways that impacts community hierarchies, family relationships, and cultural roles affected who participated in different types of procurement, how resources were distributed, and how decisions were made about procurement strategies and priorities. Understanding these social dynamics was essential for maintaining effective procurement while preserving community harmony. Cultural integration of procurement practices ensured that food acquisition activities reinforced rather than undermined community values, traditions, and social structures that maintained group cohesion and identity. This integration included ceremonial aspects of procurement activities, traditional knowledge transmission methods, and social practices that surrounded food sharing and consumption. Economic systems within procurement communities established methods for allocating resources, recognizing contributions, and managing exchanges that maintained fairness and motivation while ensuring community needs were met effectively. These economic systems included resource-sharing protocols, contribution recognition methods, and exchange mechanisms that facilitated cooperation and individual initiative. Educational systems for procurement training provided structured learning opportunities that developed the knowledge and skills needed for effective food acquisition while transmitting cultural values and social practices that supported community life. These educational systems included formal instruction methods, hands-on training opportunities, and mentorship relationships that prepared individuals for full participation in community procurement activities. Innovation management within procurement communities balanced the benefits of new techniques and technologies against the risks of abandoning proven methods that had sustained the community in the past. This balance required evaluation procedures for assessing innovations, testing methods for validating new approaches, and implementation strategies that minimized risks while capturing benefits. Quality of life considerations in procurement planning recognized that survival wasn't the only goal of community life, and that procurement activities needed to support broader goals like social satisfaction, cultural expression, and individual fulfillment. These considerations influence procurement strategies and resource allocation decisions that affected community well-being beyond simple nutritional needs. Sustainability principles guided procurement practices in ways that ensured current activities didn't compromise future resource availability or community capabilities. These principles included conservation practices, regeneration strategies, and long-term planning approaches that maintained community viability across multiple generations. Resilience-building activities developed community characteristics and capabilities that enabled survival and recovery from major challenges like environmental disasters, resource failures, or social conflicts that could disrupt normal procurement activities. These activities included diversification strategies, backup planning, and adaptive capabilities that maintained community viability under changing conditions. Legacy planning for procurement communities addressed the long-term preservation of knowledge, capabilities, and resources that would support future generations while adapting to changing conditions that might require different approaches. This planning included knowledge preservation systems, capability development programs, and resource management strategies that maintained community success over extended time periods. The interconnected relationships between procurement activities and community spiritual beliefs created sacred dimensions of food acquisition that went far beyond simple survival needs. These early humans understood their relationship with the natural world through complex spiritual frameworks that governed how they approached hunting, gathering, and food preparation. Every successful hunt was seen as a gift from animal spirits that required gratitude and respect. Plant gathering involved ceremonies that honored the earth's generosity while ensuring continued abundance. Food preparation and consumption were sacred acts that connected the community to the forces that sustained their existence. Spiritual protocols surrounding hunting activities included purification rituals that prepared hunters mentally and spiritually for taking animal life. These rituals might involve fasting, meditation, or ceremonial cleansing that demonstrated respect for the animals being hunted. The spiritual preparation was considered as important as physical preparation because success depended on maintaining proper relationships with the spiritual forces that controlled animal behavior and availability. Sacred sites within procurement territories held special significance for hunting and gathering activities that required ceremonial observance and careful protection. These sites might include locations where particularly successful hunts had occurred, springs that provided essential water for both humans and animals, or groves where important plant medicines grew. The maintenance and protection of these sacred sites was considered essential for continued procurement success and community spiritual well-being. Ceremonial aspects of food distribution reinforced community bonds while expressing gratitude for successful procurement and ensuring that spiritual obligations were fulfilled properly. The first portion of any successful hunt might be offered to spiritual forces before human consumption began. Special ceremonies marked the beginning of seasonal procurement activities and the completion of major preservation projects. These ceremonies strengthened community unity while maintaining proper relationships with the spiritual world. Taboo systems governing certain foods and procurement activities created restrictions that served both spiritual and practical functions in maintaining resource sustainability and community cohesion. Certain animals might be forbidden during breeding seasons to ensure continued population viability. Specific plants could only be gathered by designated individuals who had undergone proper spiritual preparation. These taboos prevented overexploitation while maintaining sacred relationships with natural resources. Seasonal ceremonies marked important transitions in the annual procurement cycle, and reinforced community understanding of natural rhythms that governed resource availability. Spring ceremonies celebrated renewal and prepared the community for intensive procurement activities. Gratitude for successful half-autumn ceremonies express yests while preparing for winter survival. These ceremonies maintained community morale and spiritual focus throughout challenging annual cycles. Divination practices helped groups make procurement decisions by seeking spiritual guidance about timing, location, and methods that would be most successful under current conditions. These practices might involve interpreting animal behavior, reading natural signs, or conducting ceremonies that revealed spiritual preferences for particular activities. Divination provided psychological comfort and decision-making frameworks that reduced anxiety about uncertain outcomes. Ancestor veneration within procurement communities honored the knowledge and wisdom of previous generations, while maintaining continuity in traditional practices that had proven successful over time. Stories about legendary hunters and gatherers provided inspiration and instruction for current practitioners. Ceremonial remembrance of successful ancestors reinforced community values and maintained connections to traditional knowledge systems. Spiritual healing practices addressed injuries and illnesses that resulted from procurement activities while maintaining community health and effectiveness. These practices included herbal medicines gathered during routine procurement activities, ceremonial healing that addressed spiritual causes of illness, and community support systems that cared for injured individuals. Spiritual healing complemented practical medical care in maintaining community health. Sacred knowledge, a transmission, ensured that spiritual aspects of procurement activities were passed accurately to future generations, along with practical skills and techniques. This transmission included initiation ceremonies that marked transitions to full adult participation in procurement activities, mentorship relationships that combined practical and spiritual instruction, and storytelling traditions that preserved sacred knowledge within entertaining narratives. Vision Quest traditions provided young adults with spiritual experiences that connected them personally to the natural forces governing procurement success, while establishing their adult identities within the community. These quests might involve solitary periods in wilderness areas where individuals sought spiritual guidance and personal power. The completion of vision quests marked important transitions in community status and procurement responsibilities. Shamanic practices within procurement communities provided specialized spiritual services that enhanced hunting and gathering success while maintaining community relationships with supernatural forces. Shamans might conduct ceremonies to ensure successful hunts, communicate with animal spirits to determine proper hunting protocols, or heal spiritual imbalances that could affect procurement effectiveness. These shamanic services were considered essential for maintaining community prosperity. Spiritual protection during dangerous procurement activities involved ceremonies and practices that reduced risks and ensured safe returns from hazardous hunting or gathering expeditions. These protections might include amulets or talismans that provided supernatural protection, ceremonial blessings that invoked spiritual guardianship, or ritual preparations that strengthened individual spiritual defenses. Spiritual protection complemented practical safety measures in reducing procurement risks. Sacred timing systems coordinated procurement activities with spiritual calendars that identified favorable and unfavorable periods for different types of activities. These systems might be based on lunar cycles, seasonal transitions, or spiritual observations that indicated when natural forces were most supportive of human activities. Sacred timing ensured that procurement efforts aligned with spiritual rhythms that enhanced success probabilities. Dream interpretation provided spiritual guidance for procurement planning by revealing supernatural insights about resource locations animal behavior, or environmental conditions that might affect activity success. Dreams were considered communications from spiritual forces that provided information not available through ordinary observation. Dream interpretation required specialized knowledge and skills that helped communities make better procurement decisions. Spiritual reciprocity principles governed community relationships with natural resources by establishing obligations to give back to the natural world in exchange for the resources taken for human survival. These principles might involve leaving offerings at harvest sites, conducting ceremonies that honored plant and animal spirits, or maintaining conservation practices that ensured continued resource availability. Spiritual reciprocity created sustainable relationships with natural resources. Sacred tools and equipment used in procurement activities received special ceremonial treatment that enhanced their effectiveness while maintaining proper spiritual relationships. Hunting weapons might be blessed before important expeditions. Gathering baskets could be consecrated with ceremonies that ensured successful harvests. Food processing tools received ritual treatment that prevented spiritual contamination of food supplies. Sacred tool treatment combined practical maintenance with spiritual enhancement. Community purification rituals addressed spiritual contamination that could interfere with procurement success, while maintaining community harmony and spiritual health. These rituals might be conducted after unsuccessful hunts to remove spiritual obstacles, following conflicts that could affect community cooperation, or during seasonal transitions that required spiritual renewal. Purification rituals restored spiritual balance that supported procurement effectiveness. Spiritual education for young people included instruction in the sacred aspects of procurement activities, along with practical skills and techniques. This education covered proper attitudes toward natural resources, ceremonial requirements for different activities, and spiritual practices that enhanced individual effectiveness. Spiritual education ensured that new practitioners understood their responsibilities to both human and supernatural communities. Sacred storytelling traditions preserved spiritual knowledge about procurement activities, while providing entertainment and instruction that reinforced community values and practices. These stories might recount legendary hunts that demonstrated proper spiritual attitudes, describe supernatural encounters that revealed important spiritual truths, or explain the origins of particular procurement techniques and ceremonies. Sacred storytelling maintained cultural continuity across generations. Spiritual leadership roles within procurement communities provided guidance and direction for maintaining proper relationships with supernatural forces that controlled resource availability and community prosperity. These leaders might be shamans, elders, or individuals with special spiritual gifts who could communicate with natural spirits and interpret spiritual requirements. Spiritual leadership complemented practical leadership in maintaining community effectiveness. The technological innovations that emerged from procurement activities represented remarkable achievements in human ingenuity that solved complex problems using only natural materials and human intelligence. These innovations weren't random discoveries, but systematic developments that built upon accumulated knowledge and careful experimentation over generations. Each technological advancement represented solutions to specific challenges that improved procurement efficiency, reduced risks, or enabled access to previously unavailable resources. Composite tool construction combined different materials to create implements that performed better than any single material could achieve alone. Spear points made from sharp stone were hafted to wooden shafts using sinew bindings and natural adhesives that created weapons stronger and more versatile than any component material. Arrows combined wood shafts, stone or bone points, and feather fletching in precisely balanced assemblies that flew accurately over long distances. Mechanical advantage systems used leverage, tension, and stored energy to amplify human strength, and create forces that would be impossible to generate through muscle power alone. Spear throwers extended effective arm length and increased projectile velocity dramatically. Spring-powered traps used bent wood to generate crushing forces that could kill large animals instantly. Pulley systems made from vine and wood allowed individuals to lift weights that would normally require multiple people. Precision manufacturing techniques created tools with standardized dimensions and performance characteristics that ensured reliable results under demanding conditions. Stone knapping required incredible skill to produce sharp edges with consistent angles and cutting properties. Wooden shaft production involved careful selection, seasoning, and shaping that created straight, strong, lightweight handles. Cordage manufacture produced uniform strength and flexibility across long lengths of rope and binding material. Material science understanding enabled the selection and treatment of raw materials to optimize. Different their properties for specific applications, types of stone were chosen for different cutting applications based on their hardness, fracture patterns, and edge retention characteristics. Various woods were selected for different tool components based on their strength, flexibility, and workability. Animal materials were processed using techniques that maximized their useful properties while preventing degradation. Quality testing procedures ensured that finished tools met performance standards before they were relied upon for critical procurement activities. Spear points were tested for sharpness and attachment security. Bowstrings were subjected to stress tests that verified their strength and durability. Trap mechanisms were tested repeatedly to ensure reliable triggering and sufficient power. Quality testing prevented equipment failures during crucial moments. Manufacturing specialization within communities created individuals who focused their skills on producing specific types of tools and equipment that required advanced expertise to create properly. Master flint knappers could produce stone tools far superior to what general practitioners could achieve. Bow makers developed specialized skills that created more accurate and powerful weapons. Basket weavers produced containers with specific characteristics for different procurement applications. Tool maintenance systems ensured that expensive and time-consuming equipment remained functional throughout extended use periods that could quickly wear out or damage improperly maintained implements. Sharpening techniques restored cutting edges to optimal condition. Replacement procedures allowed worn components to be substituted without replacing entire tools. Preventive maintenance prevented small problems from becoming major failures that could compromise procurement activities. Standardization efforts created consistency in tool design and performance that allowed community members to use equipment made by different individuals while ensuring reliable results. Standard dimensions for arrow shafts ensured compatibility with different bow designs. Consistent hafting techniques allowed stone points to be interchanged between different wooden handles. Standardization improved efficiency and reduced training requirements for tool users. Innovation documentation through demonstration and instruction preserved successful design improvements while transmitting manufacturing knowledge to future generations. New tool designs were carefully tested and refined before being adopted widely. Successful innovations were demonstrated to other community members and incorporated into standard manufacturing practices. Innovation documentation ensured that improvements weren't lost and could be built upon by future innovators. Technology transfer between communities spread successful innovations across wide geographic areas while adapting designs to local materials and conditions. Trade relationships facilitated the exchange of finished tools and manufacturing knowledge. Intermarriage brought individuals with different technical skills into new communities. Technology transfer accelerated innovation by combining ideas from different cultural traditions and environmental contexts. Reverse engineering capabilities allowed communities to analyze and reproduce successful tools and techniques observed in other groups while adapting materials, ting them to local conditions, and careful examination revealed manufacturing of foreign tools principles that could be applied techniques and to local production design. Reverse engineering required sophisticated analytical skills and technical knowledge that enabled rapid methodology of useful adoption innovations. Experimental development in tool, provide and techniques systematic approaches for testing new minimizing risks and resource designs while waste. Prototype development allowed testing of new concepts before committing resources to full-scale production. Controlled testing compared new designs against established standards to verify improvements. Experimental methodology accelerated innovation while preventing costly failures. Resource optimization in tool manufacturing maximized the value obtained from limited raw materials while minimizing waste and production costs. Efficient cutting patterns reduced waste when shaping wooden components. Stone knapping techniques maximized the number of useful tools that could be produced from limited raw material. Resource optimization was essential for communities with limited access to high-quality materials. As we've journeyed through this remarkable world of our earliest ancestors, we've glimpsed something profound about human nature itself. These weren't primitive beings stumbling through existence, but sophisticated people whose survival depended on knowledge, cooperation, and innovation that would challenge even our modern capabilities. Their days began before dawn with decisions that could mean the difference between feast and famine, life and death. Every footprint read, every plant identified, every tool crafted represented generations of accumulated wisdom passed down through stories around flickering fires. Their mastery extended far beyond simple hunting and gathering. They were engineers who built complex traps, meteorologists who predicted weather from cloud formations, botanists who knew the properties of hundreds of plants, and strategists who coordinated group efforts with precision that modern teams would envy. They understood their environment with an intimacy we've largely lost, reading the landscape like a book written in tracks, scents, and seasonal rhythms. Perhaps most remarkably, they achieved all of this while maintaining communities bound together by sharing, ceremony, and mutual dependence. No one survived alone. Success belonged to everyone, and failure was shared equally. Their innovations weren't patented or hoarded but freely shared, improving life for entire regions through networks of trade and cultural exchange. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, remember that you carry the legacy of these remarkable people in your very DNA. Their intelligence, their resourcefulness, their capacity for cooperation under pressure, all of it lives on in you. Sweet dreams, and thank you for joining me on this journey into our shared past.